tons of alcohol, you know, hours of porn, you know, and I was in grad school at the time when I had discovered what had happened. I just started grad school for my counseling program.
Hi, Roy.
Hello. Hello, John.
Thanks for being here. It's good seeing you.
Good seeing you too.
I know we don't get a chance to see each other too often, but I'm so thankful for you taking time out of your day to be here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Man, you know, you and I, we have a lot of mutual friends from the past.
That's right.
Because of your days in KCM. I was in KCM as a student and on staff. Peter Kim is someone that we both know.
Yeah.
Who's now out in Taiwan doing ministry
right.
there. And you guys were on the same Brazil KCM missions team, right?
Was that like
98? Right, 98.
1998. He was the youngest in our group at USC. Jimmy Han was the leader. I was the mom of the group. They called me mom. And yeah, we had some all-stars on that team.
Oh my goodness. So he was like a freshman or a sophomore?
Yeah, he was a freshman at USC.
Okay. And what year were you in?
I had already finished school.
Okay.
So I was on like staff, I guess, for KCM.
Okay. Oh, so you were on KCM staff for a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
How many years?
I think it was maybe that year or maybe 1 year afterwards. Like it was right after I had finished.
And what school were you at? What's college?
The campus for KCM?
No, as a student.
You're right. Berkeley.
Oh, this is at Berkeley KCM. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Okay. So we don't even have that anymore, Berkeley KCM.
No, it's a dinosaur. It's now extinct.
So you were at Berkeley KCM, going there, graduated.
Uh-huh.
Talk about kind of your beginning days of ministry. Like when you were at Berkeley,
right.
Did you know that you were going to go into pastoral ministry already?
Not really.
Okay.
So KCM was pretty instrumental in the formation of my earlier faith. And I was heavily influenced by, older brothers like Jimmy Han and James Han and Jim Jung. Ben Chin would come up every so often to also guest teach, but I was very influenced by KCM, and I feel like looking back, I think my wanting to become a pastor was kind of a mixture of wanting to be like them and also the more pure love, I guess, of what the gospel meant to me and wanting to share that with people and to guide people in Christ. But I think more emotionally, I felt like I wanted to just kind of be like these older brothers who were who poured so much into me and other people. But that was both good and bad, I think. I feel like when I actually started pastoring, which was in 98, because I graduated in 96, and I started seminary in 98 down in Talbot.
And what church were you at when you were pastoring?
At L.A. Hanmi Church in El Monte.
With Pastor Ben?
Yeah, he was my boss.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know this.
Yeah, he was my boss and my roommate.
Wow, that's some deep history right there.
Oh yeah, yeah, we go way back.
What ministry were you a pastor of?
I was started as an intern in the junior high ministry.
Okay.
And then I became junior high pastor, and then I became high school pastor, and then like youth pastor.
Yeah.
And then I transitioned away from ministry for a while.
That's when you got into academic administration, right? At Talbot or Biola, you were working there?
I worked at Biola actually in the payroll department.
Yeah.
But then I went back into the ministry. I became a EM pastor for about 4 or 5 years. But, going back to the formation, I felt like once I started pastoring, it wasn't quite what I signed up for.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like the shine of wanting to be like these older brothers had worn off. And now I'm just kind of stuck with the actual task of pastoring. And I was like, this is way different than being a campus pastor who comes up to Berkeley once a week and like hangs out with the fellows and teaches and just is well loved by everybody. Like, this is way, way different. And honestly, I think it's just like attrition. You know, after about 8-9 years of, you know, actual pastoring, I felt like I couldn't meet the expectations of the church and maybe just my own internal expectations. And I withered away.
What were some of those expectations that you felt like you weren't meeting? And what were some examples of like that shine disappearing? Like, what do you mean by that?
So I started feeling it actually when I was youth pastoring, and then it got way stronger when I was an EM pastor. I felt like the burden of being the shepherd of these people, both the kids and then later on the adults, I think I put on too much of that burden upon myself. I felt like their spiritual walk depended upon me. So whether that meant the sermons needed to be as perfect as possible, or I had to be like on call 24/7. If there was ever a crisis, like I had to handle it perfectly. Like I just felt like it was all on me. And then I remember, you know, this is not the kind of pressure that you're really conscious of. You just sort of, I think it kind of leaks out sideways in many different ways. I remember once, staff can often be a revolving door. So sometimes people join staff and then they kind of burn out after 1 year. And then other times people stay for a long time. But I remember feeling like I couldn't quite lead the staff well either. Like I felt a bit panicky in not really knowing how to guide them, how to conduct meetings with them, how to shepherd I knew theoretically that that's one of my biggest tasks was to shepherd the staff, but I wasn't quite sure how to do that. But I remember at one of the youth retreats, you know, a lot of logistics to do, and then there was a time when the older students started playfully hazing the younger students, like the 7th graders. And that made me nervous because I was like, what are they going to be doing? But then I remember in one of the larger group meetings, gosh, what was it? Was it they had to like chug something, or they had to like shave their head or something like that? And one of the kids I felt was getting really scared, if I remember correctly. And I started getting really nervous about that. And I felt like all the pressure was on me to make everything stop. But I knew that the pressure was building for even like the older people, the older students, for them to have fun. So I felt kind of caught in the middle. Like, do I stop their fun, or do I help out this one little kid who's feeling really scared? And it all came to a head when the older students were egging it on, like, go, 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 that kind of thing. And for whatever reason, I singled one student out, like one of the seniors, and I told that person, shut up, in front of everyone. And it was just dead quiet. And you could hear a pin drop. And in that moment, I don't know whether you've seen like, you know, that Peter Billingsley movie, A Christmas Story.
Yeah, of course.
You know, the Red Ryder BB gun. And, you know, he let out that one.
Yeah.
Oh, fudge. Right? But I didn't say fudge, right? And it's just like that moment I said, shut up. And I was like, oh no. Internally, like, what have I done? Right? And the guy like runs out like in tears because I singled him out, and it's like the most embarrassing thing in the world for him. And I said, okay, I said to my staff, okay, take over for me. I got to go and chase this guy, right? And I got to make amends here. And I eventually did, to the best of my ability. But I just remember feeling like, what is going on? This is like chaotic for me. Like it felt so out of character for me to just completely unravel like that and tell someone to shut up in front of everyone. But I think looking back, it's just, I felt so much pressure to do this job well. And I wasn't quite sure how to do the job well. And that's just one of many examples of like, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And I felt like either I placed expectations upon myself or I felt expectations of other people upon me. And this got even worse as an EM pastor, where my bosses, I felt like in youth group, as a youth group pastor, my boss was Ben Shin, who was second gen like me. So things were way better. But when your boss as an EM pastor is the KM, there's major cultural differences and expectations. And I was carrying the weight of my own expectations of myself, my perceived expectations of my congregation, and then the expectations of the KM as well. It's like, it felt like I was doubly, triply burdened. And I'd burnt out.
I agree with that because I think a lot of us, when we first started, as Chonda says, in our 20s, and especially in our culture, we often look up to the Pastor Bens. And, for me, it was like Pastor Richard Kim, and we want to be just like them. We thought like that was the model and example. In many ways, they were the model and example. So we were trying to follow what we thought this is what it means to be a pastor. But we fall so short of that because number one, we're not them.
Yeah, we're not them.
We don't preach like them. I struggled a lot with that. Like, how come no one comes up to me after I preach like these guys? I struggle so much with that in my 20s. And I would be like, I preach like just like these guys. And I think a lot of us, even now, we're jumping into these very, very important, even like prestigious roles. And we fall short because we're trying to be, number one, something that we're not.
Yeah.
Number two, comparing ourselves to these predecessors, which is impossible. And then, we struggle with that. We struggle so much with that. So when you were at LA Hanmi and you were feeling like that, did you ever talk to Pastor Ben about that?
I was scared to. I was scared to share this with any of the pastoral staff.
Even though Pastor Ben was like your friend, like your roommate.
Yeah. There was a shame in feeling like I felt like I had to fake my pleasure in pastoring, if that makes sense. I remember we would have pastoral meetings at our home. And so we'd have like five or six guys together, and we're all talking about our ministries. And people would share their excitement for such and such that they're planning and things like that. And I just remember, especially kind of in the earlier days, like I didn't know what to share because I think what I felt most of the time was fear or pressure. But I didn't want to share that, Even
at LA Hanmi, you felt fear and pressure at LA Hanmi.
Yeah. Again, not necessarily from external. It's really just more like internally driven, you know? And kind of like, even in sitting in class at Talbot, I felt like everyone else knew what they were doing except for me, and they were asking questions, in class. And I'm like, I don't even know what questions to ask, right? My brain doesn't think that fast. And so I'm thinking, these guys must be brilliant. These guys must be so don't get me wrong. I thought I was absorbing the information as best I could. And I did enjoy that learning experience, but just hearing these other students talking and asking questions, like there was like this looseness that they had that I felt like I didn't have, So even in our pastoral meetings, as they're sharing freely about these things, like I don't remember saying that much. And I just remember feeling like, oh, I can't wait for this meeting to be over so that I can kind of go back to whatever I was doing, you know? So that did generate, even during my Hanmi days as a youth pastor. And then, should I share a story about my EM days?
Yeah, please.
So I told you about like the double, triple burden. And you probably well know that in probably 99% of Korean churches, there is 새벽기도. Okay. And along with 새벽기도 comes van driving duties.
Oh gosh, yes.
So,
oh man.
So I knew that when I went to that church, I didn't go in as a pastor. I went in as a member. Okay. And so my predecessor, he and other people in like on the CM side and on the EM side, they had to do the van driving duties. And those two guys were also bilingual. So they could preach in Korean. So they were asked to preach. But I'm thinking, I'm second gen. I can't preach in Korean. So I at least if it ever comes to the day where I need to do van driving duties, at least I don't have to preach, right? Wrong. So I became ordained on, I think, my third year of being an EM pastor.
With what denomination?
It was with KPCA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was at Tongshin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where you were the EM pastor?
No. The classes were at Tongshin.
Okay.
And then the exam was at Tongshin too.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were kind of like our sister church. This was FPC was my church.
Right.
Fullerton. I wanted to become ordained, but it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to be a pastor for the rest of my days. It was actually because it was for more practical reasons. I wanted to be able to baptize. I wanted to be able to administer communion. If there, God forbid, ever was a funeral, I would want to be the one that can, do the proceedings. So, so here I was doing all the ordination stuff. And then along came the duties of, the van driving, which was, picking up Kwanzanim, 4 or 5 of them at like, I don't know, some godforsaken hour, like 4:45 or something like that. And, but then the head pastor said that he wanted me to preach. And I'm like, 목사님, I can't speak Korean. Like I could order at a restaurant, right? But I can't preach. And he's like, just do your best. I'm like, goodness. So, so because I had such a strong kind of submission to authority kind of bent to me, like I could only protest so far, because otherwise if I protested too much, then I'm going to be seen as some sort of insolent, pastor. So I remember having to do EM stuff throughout the week, and then, having to preach for the KM Hippokido. But it's not like I could write out a manuscript. Like I didn't have the time for that. So I would put out some bullet points in English and the passage that I wanted to talk about. And I'm up there with the microphone and I'm looking at my bullet points and I'm trying to translate it on the spot into Korean.
Live, yes.
The worst sermons ever.
Okay. My goodness.
So you first start with like hymns. And of course, 찬송가 is in Korean. And I'm trying to lead them in song. And I couldn't keep up. Yeah. Right? I couldn't keep up, and it's all a cappella. There's no piano, nothing. It's just all a cappella. And I'm even struggling to tell them, please turn your hymnals to this number or whatever. And I'm like fumbling over my words, and I'm trying to lead them. And I'm like, I had to lead them in Lord's Prayer. And, you know, when we're doing it in English, we're doing it fast in English, but they're doing it fast in Korean. I can't keep up with them. So I'm starting it off and I'm just kind of, it's almost like the mic's not working, you know, sort of thing, just kind of staying silent and mumbling my way along. And then I'm preaching and there's just like 15, 20-second pauses between sentences as I'm trying to translate this in my head, right? John, it was the worst. Just the worst. And then I just kind of, you know, I finish, and, you know, closing prayer of my message, trying to do it freestyle in Korean. And I'm just like going back down, sitting to my seat and just feeling like a total loser. And then when I drive the 권사님's home, they're like, "Oh, 목사님, your message was so good." And I said to them, "Oh, what did you understand?" And they were saying this and this and this. John, that was not what I was preaching about. That whatever they got from it was not from what I was saying. So after I did this maybe like twice or three times, I remember again feeling like a loser and going back to the pastor's office where the associate pastor was, the Korean associate pastor. And I said to him, I was so dejected. And I said, do I need to keep doing this? Like, why do I have to keep doing this? Because I can't even speak Korean and I've got my EM duties to do. And so what he said, like, kind of sent shivers down my spine. First of all, he goes, "Yeah." I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, kind of disrespectful. Like, I'm a fellow pastor. You say "yeah" to me, right? And he's like, 목사들은 고생해야 돼. For those who are listening who don't know Korean, it's like, you know, pastors need to suffer. And I said, why? It says, when pastors suffer, that's when the congregants get inspired and their faith grows. I said, oh, snap. Like, this was my awakening. This is their battle cry, right? Like, this is what they are called to do, is to suffer so that the church can grow in faith. There is no fighting this.
Yeah.
So that's when I realized this is a losing battle. Like, I cannot complain about this anymore to them because they will see this as like complete, like, this is going against everything that they believe in. John, that was, even though I told you before, this is kind of like attrition for me, but once that conversation happened, that was when things accelerated. Like, that was the beginning of the end for me, because I realized this is not sustainable for me, you know? So in some ways, I guess I'm glad for that conversation, because it just sort of like, it made things a bit exponential for me. But it was also very terrifying that, is this what most Korean churches believe in? Like, this is why pastors run themselves to the ground, is because it's for the sake of inspiring the people in the church to grow their faith, you know? I said, I don't want to be a part of that.
You talked about differences, cultural differences. And I think a lot of us who are Korean Americans, we understand that there's cultural differences between first and second gen. The 새벽 기도 thing, the morning prayer thing, I think many of us growing up in the church, especially at Chonnosas, we remember those days and we remember having to go there, things like that. What were other kind of challenges that you experienced? I think the suffering one is actually huge too. I think all of us also grew up with that. The number one, I think, example that we could bring up in terms of suffering is like low pay, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just pay you nothing because just suffer,
right.
You know, like you shouldn't be paid a lot. Just we're not supposed to be taken care of well.
That's right.
Suffer through pay. But What were other challenges that you experienced with the first gen KM, whether it was at Hanmi or at FPC?
I think at Hanmi, I, as a youth pastor, was shielded a lot by people like Benjin. So I didn't know too much of the goings on. I didn't have a whole lot of dealings with the KM other than, let's say, the kids' parents. And I guess when it comes to the kids' parents, they really do depend on, like, they would kind of say, oh, 전도사님 부탁해, like it's almost like they're kind of placing the burden of spiritual leadership and discipleship onto me as the pastor and also the youth group leaders, like the staff, as opposed to them asking me and the staff, could you help us as parents to be better disciplers of our kids? Like, that's not what they were asking at all, right? So I already felt that I don't know whether that happens at maybe like other ethnic churches too, like Black churches, Hispanic churches, but or white churches, but that's definitely what I felt in, as a youth pastor, is them placing that the burden of their kids' spiritual growth upon us, right? And then as an EM, I don't know whether this was necessarily a KM thing, but I felt like the EM pastor position was supposed to be somewhat of like a surrogate father role. I felt like a lot of the complaints from the EM people about usually dad is just being emotionally absent. So that's why, the EM pastors were kind of called upon to be very present for them and to have a lot of dialogue and to kind of be that father figure for them. Quite burdensome, and so I think that's why I felt some resistance as I was trying to kind of disciple people to, greater growth is, I think I was 15 steps ahead of where they were actually at. And so I felt frustration, and then they probably felt like they couldn't be good enough for my expectations. So it was kind of a mess in that way. As far as direct dealings with a KM, it's really more of this vibe that you get. It wasn't so explicit, but even something like you collect the offering from the EM and then you bring that EM offering to the KM side, and the KM side now creates a budget for you guys or us. Like, it's almost like getting 용돈 from them, like allowance, right? And it kind of keeps us in this really like kid-like perspective. Daddy, please, can we get some money for, going to the mall, that kind of thing. So, and these were people who are like in their 30s and maybe not 40s yet, but like people in their 30s who are now having kids of their own and asking for 용돈 from the KM side. Like, it was kind of funky, but it made sense to the Korean on the KM side, but it didn't really make a whole lot of sense on our side.
What's interesting is that you said even when you're at Hanmi with Pastor Ben, you felt this like falling short of what it really means to be like these guys, and you were struggling a lot, even with fear and shame in your staff meetings. And you had a great relationship with Pastor Ben, but you still felt like that. So I find it odd that even though you felt like that, why did you go from there to become an EM pastor, which is even a higher authoritative role? And not only that, you left Pastor Ben from Hanmi and you went to another church. So why did you do that?
Yeah. So this probably would bleed into the next topic of my first marriage. So when I stopped my youth pastor role, it was to finish up my last year at Talbot, which is in 2002, and then to prepare for becoming a full-time missionary. I wanted to prepare to become a missionary to France, of all places, because I had had a really good discussions with other European missionaries to go out there. I mean, it's not classically known as a mission field, but they're dead. They're spiritually dead. So I wanted to join that movement. But it was in that step down period where I was just focusing on studies and finishing up and preparing for missions that I met my first wife. I met her at Talbot as well. And she also wanted to become a missionary. So the church that I eventually became the EM pastor of was her church. Yeah. So we got married, and then we wanted to find a home church to kind of be a sending church, but it wasn't going to be Hanmi. It was going to be her church.
Why wasn't it a Hanmi?
That's a good question.
Or why wasn't the idea to bring her to Hanmi instead of you going to be the pastor at PC?
Gosh, it's so long ago. I don't quite recall the reasons for landing at her church, but I do remember that I think we talked about it, and I think she, if I remember correctly, I think she felt a lot of insecurity in leaving that church because it was like very, like it's like her family.
Yeah.
Whether that's what she explicitly stated or whether that's my way of kind of like caring for her, like that was just the idea that, this would be the place that, we'd both land at. But then when my predecessor pastors at that church left for full-time missions, there was this void, and he asked me to replace him as the EM pastor.
Okay. So you knew them. You knew the predecessor there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sure the position had a lot to do with it, like that conversation.
Yeah. And I remember it's not as if I was super thrilled to fill that gap, because again, like I felt like I just don't know whether I wanted to be a pastor, but I think it felt like this was my way of continuing to serve in this church, which is going to be our sending church. And then, and it made sense theoretically, but then as I stepped into that role, I don't know how many months afterwards, I'm thinking, what have I got myself into? So, but I think it was all like kind of more for the sake of like a larger purpose.
Yeah,
of
that makes sense.
The long-term view of being sent out as missionaries.
All those reasons are very connected. So it connects the dots there.
Yeah.
There's something that you experienced that I think many of us never want to experience. Even when we hear about it, it's such a sad thing. And, share only what you feel comfortable sharing. But you said first marriage. In your first marriage, you went through probably the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
This unfaithfulness happened in your first marriage.
Yeah.
I remember, I think I was in Talbot still when it happened because I was in KCM staff during that time. I had college students who were at that church at FBC.
Okay.
So I remember, because I knew you, we didn't have this close relationship, but I knew who you were. And I just remember my heart sank when I heard about the unfaithfulness. And so when that happened in your marriage, what was your first thought? Like, what were you thinking? Were you thinking, I got to keep this together? Were you thinking, I don't know what to do? Were you calling Pastor Ben? Like, what did you kind of like start thinking about when that first happened?
So, man, it's telling that I have to pause and think back to that time. Like, it's telling of how much I've moved forward from that. And it's almost like I have to kind of press pause on where I'm at today and like 2008-ish, so that's what, 15 years ago or so. I had already, I was at towards the end of my rope as far as being a pastor. And I had already started considering becoming a full-time counselor, right? So not only was I kind of going through that rough stage, but in our 4th year of marriage, that's when we wanted to try to have a child for the first time. And she conceived, but then miscarried after 5 or 6 weeks, right? And she and I grieved that loss differently. I think I was a bit more of a compartmentalizer, and she was a lot more kind of just holistic, right, as far as the grief is concerned. So during the times, I think, when I could compartmentalize and like laugh about certain things, whatever, I think she took offense at that, almost like I didn't care, like I was being disrespectful to this whole grieving process, when of course that wasn't my intention, right? So, and she had her own way of suffering, and so she started to isolate. So me being very conflict avoidant, typically, I just wanted to kind of not approach that and just kind of give her space to be isolated. But it's through that isolation process that step by step, she started to not pay heed to like classic boundaries that one should heed as a married person. And
this behavior, you said you think started after the miscarriage. It wasn't like this before in your marriage.
No.
And even up to that point, were there things going on in your marriage that you guys felt like this is not going well right now between us? Were there signs?
More just typical marriage things.
Yeah, just normal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Things like, whether we would argue about something or we'd have a miscommunication about something,
Yeah.
but nothing like this.
Nothing major.
Yeah.
So this really was kind of the beginning of what you say kind of changed the boundaries for her.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And so, step by step, super gradual, like a glacier, she started to be emotionally invested in another guy who was at our church.
Yeah.
And then it turned into physical. And this whole thing lasted for, I think, about a year or more. And
you didn't know?
I knew about the emotional investment. And that's when I told her, like, I confronted her. I said, what is this? And so.
When you confronted her, was like, she just kind of fought back? Was just like refused?
No, she is kind of like, caught red-handed kind of thing. And, but her response, was shame-based. It was, why did you marry me? I'm no good for you. Why, that kind of thing. And so I don't think she did that intentionally. I think that was just her automatic response. And then, of course, my automatic response is to rescue. So rather than me feeling all like hurt and everything, I felt like, oh, shoot, no, don't feel like that, and all that kind of stuff. So it's very confusing, And I think this is something that now that I've been doing this kind of work as a counselor, I realize that those who have been discovered and caught doing something to this degree, they tend to spiral into shame. And then a lot of times the other person does like rescuing. It's completely unfair, So she promised never to, to stop all things and everything. And I had no reason to like, I felt like, okay, you know what? Yeah, these things happen. I'm glad that you understand we're on the same page. And so, you're going to avoid this at all costs. But she didn't, So.
And you didn't know that it was
I didn't know
continuing.
that.
Okay.
That was all secretive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I did eventually find out, it was not just that she had resumed the emotional affair, but that she had, gone sexual with him too. The world ended, So And this is what I think, listeners need to understand for those who are going to be pastors or who are already pastors. If someone comes to you saying that my husband or my wife cheated on me, it's the response to the best of your ability has got to be something like, your child just died. It's almost like we've become desensitized to it because we see it all the time in movies and TV. And when it does happen in real life, sometimes people don't talk about it, so we don't really know what's going on. But when it actually happens to you, there's not too many calamities in life that are worse than feeling betrayed by your own spouse. So when a pastor doesn't respond to that degree and just kind of like, because I heard one of my clients told me, actually several of my clients told me, that when they tell their pastor that so-and-so, like their spouse cheated on them, the pastor's first response is, okay, you're not going to divorce, are you?
Oh my gosh.
Right? Like, it's the worst.
Oh my gosh.
And of course, my clients tell me, like, I just stopped going to that church.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Of course.
Right? So, I felt my world ended, and I didn't quite know what to do because I was caught between, should I try to be a role model? Should I try to be like Hosea? Right? Which is an unfair comparison. Should I try to be like, like God, where Israelite just, spends time with prostitutes repeatedly and just give mercy again and again? So should I try to be a role model and kind of suffer through this and like everything's okay? Or should I just end it all because the pain was too great? But then if I ended it all, then I'm dashing my own personal dream of being married to this woman that I loved, right? So there's really no win here. It's just it's the worst situation. And so we did separate because I just couldn't be under the same roof as her. And then when I was able to kind of, it's not even me like healing. It's really just me numbing myself with like tons of alcohol, hours of porn, and I was in grad school at the time when I had discovered what had happened. I just started grad school for my counseling program. Here I was trying to get through my studies, but medicating myself at every turn. So 4-ish months of that. And then when I sat down with her and saying, what are we going to do? What do you want to do here? Because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I still haven't really, she gave up on couple counseling. And so,
so she refused. She didn't want to do it.
We did it maybe twice.
And it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I was still super irrational and emotive. And I was like, just so angry in those couple sessions. Yeah. And I think, I wasn't being productive, but she just, after 2 sessions, she just stopped. And so there was no real pathway for, like reconciliation between the two of us. But then after like 4-ish months, when I met with her again, she made it clear to me that she wasn't trying to win my trust back. She was just, I think, again, whether this was shame or whether this was something else, I don't know. But she made it clear that she wasn't actively trying to win my trust back. It was just, I'd like to stay married, but it's not necessarily out of love. It's because like, I don't want to be a divorced woman. And I've always wanted to be a mom. And, you could think of every expletive in your head as you're hearing this is just like, this is the exact opposite of what I want to hear. So it's at that point when I was like, I have to make a decision. Like, do I carry on this marriage by myself? Be Hosea until I'm dead? Or do I say, I'll take the get out of jail free card, which is, Jesus's exclusion, his one exclusion, right? Exemption for adultery being the thing for divorce. And I decided to take that get out of jail free card. But it wasn't as if like I was rejoicing. It was just, hardest decision of my life, So I felt like I was now venturing into complete unknown territory. And I was like, who's going to want to marry a divorced guy? Right. And I'm late 30s at that time. And might as well just focus on being a good counselor, But my triggers were so strong. I had such violent thoughts. In psychology, there's something called a good bad split. And that's where something is so traumatic for you and so untenable that you can't hold in your hands a combination of good and bad. Like they can't coexist, right? So you have to do a split. It's almost like mom is all good, dad is all bad, or vice versa, right? Even though they probably create a parental system that kind of makes a lot of wreckage in the family. So my good bad split was my wife was the good, the victim, and she was seduced by the bad, which was the affair partner. So almost all my rage was directed towards the affair partner. And so kept a golf club in the trunk of my car just in case I would see this guy.
Wow.
And it gave me a sense of power as I was driving around, like knowing like I'm going to end this dude, right? Because anger and power is way more you could deal with that better than sorrow and confusion and fear and all that kind of stuff, right?
It feels better too.
I felt just like, raging all the times I was driving. As I was sleeping at night, I would have fantasies about ending him. Like I remember like sometimes I'd be like, okay, if I go to like a Denny's and I see this dude like eating at a booth, I would like dive for him like over the table towards his throat, and just end him. So, and then I'd play that in my head, and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm wide awake now. I can't go back to sleep. And so I would start a new fantasy about him, And so at a point, I'm realizing I can't keep doing this because if I keep on fantasizing like this and one day I do see him, that fantasy is going to become a reality and I'll go to jail and there goes the rest of my life. So that's why I ended up, when I finished school, I ended up leaving SoCal so that there was no chance that I would bump into him, So going back home where I grew up in NorCal, I did my internship up there and it was better, like there were less triggers for me and I didn't have to actively think about seeing him somewhere. But that's the extent of like how much this messed with me. Like I unraveled, and it took a long time for me to pick up the pieces again.
When that happened, was that kind of the last time you were at that church? You left your church, you resigned from that position?
She confessed to me that the affair was actually an affair. like, so remember I told you that there was the emotional investment, right? That was while I was still pastoring.
Right.
But then already by that time, I had given my church 1 year's notice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You already told them.
I told them that I'm going to be phasing out, going into the counseling field.
Okay.
And my last day at that church was in October of 2009. And then the confession of this being like a full-blown affair was Thanksgiving, 1 month after I had officially resigned.
Oh, that you already left.
Yeah. So I now had no ties with that church anymore.
You weren't even attending?
No.
Okay.
No. So who knows whether that was like her timing to like not have ties with the church anymore to confess that. But Thanksgiving always kind of has that feel for me.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, not so much anymore.
Yeah.
But definitely every Thanksgiving, like early on, it was just like the worst.
Where were you guys at after you left during that time? Were you still just checking out churches?
I think so.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. But again, we were pretty icy. Like I think she just kept her distance from me. I may have visited churches by myself, if I remember correctly, but things weren't like for many, many months during her affair, things were not close between the two of us. And so I felt like, this is just her depression. I need to kind of care for that and pray for that. But that wasn't what it was.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because when this kind of got out and then we started to find out, I heard that her and whoever this guy was continued just to stay at FPC as this couple, and they just accepted it. Is that true?
I don't know all the details. I chose not to hear about it.
Okay.
But I think the gist of that is right.
That's wild.
I don't know to what extent it was accepted. But because this dude's dad was an elder.
I know that. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think they did stay there for a while. But then, if I remember correctly, some people really had issues with that. Like, where's the repentance? Where's all that kind of stuff?
Right.
And I think maybe there was subtle pressure or overt pressure for them to eventually leave. I think they did. But again, I chose not to.
Right. I don't expect you to dig into that. Yeah. And don't know about that. But just that fact that even a little bit of that happened, I thought that was just wild. And then he was the son of an elder, and I'm sure that's part of why it was just okay. And, they're trying to respect his dad. That is just wild. And there's so many stories like that, unfortunately, that we hear about because of this elder connection.
So do you remember when you talked earlier today about shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, word of all this reached the ears of the senior pastor, the one who wanted me to preach for morning prayer, that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't reach out to me once.
Oh my gosh. No way.
He had my number, but there was no like, Roy 목사님, are you okay? I heard what happened. And, like, how can I be praying for you? Like nothing. It's just radio silence. Nothing. So if I'm generous in spirit, it's like, okay, that's the shame talking, right? Like it's just too much shame to handle. And, maybe he didn't want to, like, maybe he felt like awkward, like that he would step on my toes and whatever. But John, there comes a time where your humanity needs to show forth, right? And you realize like this dude, Roy, must be in the worst possible way. Like, screw shame. Like, I'm going to call this dude and say, are you okay? Because this is like the worst thing that could ever happen to someone. But I don't know, I feel like I'm bad-mouthing him, but like, there were other instances where there were like very awkward and shameful things that happened to people at the church. And he didn't address it, you know? And I don't know whether this is just a him thing. Probably not. It's probably like a many pastors thing that just something within us says like, I can't speak to this because it's just too shameful. But what's the fallout of that? It's just, you feel like so invisible and so dehumanized, and like, do you even care? You know?
I mean, the fallout is from the many people that we both know who have experienced this, who have been hurt. They don't want to ever go back to the Korean church because of that terrible experience.
Right.
And I think it's like shame mixed with like the 목사님 thinking, I got to keep the church together. I can't lose my church.
Can you imagine that?
I can't lose my members.
Yeah.
I have to keep my job.
That's right. Son of an elder, right?
Right.
Son of an influential elder. Like, is this scandal going to be too big?
Yeah.
So we've got to kind of keep a tight lip on this.
And I think, to be honest, that's probably the number one or two reason why they don't like to deal with it, because they can't lose their church.
You know, if there's really anything, like, I know that seminaries do a good job of like maybe teaching theology, practical theology, systematics, you know, church history. But if we're really talking about the nuts and bolts of what happens in a church community, like, this kind of stuff isn't a rarity. Like, I'm talking about, like, how do we actually deal with one another in a way where, yes, it's culturally appropriate, but at the same time, certain cultural things need to be like shoved out the door for the sake of actually ministering to people. And if there's anything that needs to be taught, I think at seminaries, it's like examples like this, where we say, what are we supposed to do in a situation where this is a Korean context and shame dominates? But if we don't actually deal with shame in a way that is, number one, biblical, like really, truly believing that, you know, Christ can bear the weight of our shame, and let's actually minister to people in the way that is impactful, then we need to have many conversations in seminary about what shame looks like and how it devastates people. It makes them not want to go to church ever again, like you just said. Like, I really feel like those types of conversations could actually supplant some of the other classes that we feel good listening to these things and filling our heads with this knowledge. But I don't know, as a pastor, I don't know how many times I ever really use that knowledge, you know, when I'm preaching or teaching or doing anything. But I sure would love to have an entire semester or two in dealing with this kind of stuff, so I actually know what to do in certain situations that you know, help people feel ministered to.
And I think what's really difficult, we were talking a little bit about this before we started, what's really difficult is that we're second generation. We never learned this. We don't know how to deal with it. Most of us went to westernized American seminaries. You and I both went to Talbot. And so we're learning theologically, biblically, but a lot of it is from a westernized perspective. And so we don't know how to take what we got in the seminary and apply it to our culture. What we usually do is just kind of lead our churches in a very Americanized way, westernized way, which does make sense because we all grew up here. But when things like this come up, we don't know what to do. And to be fair, you know, seminary can't get into everything, you know, I mean, and is it their job to go through every possible problem or issue you could go through? I don't think so. I think it'd be very difficult. I think what's really hard though is that everything you talked about, it's our culture.
Yeah.
We never really figured out how to apply these things appropriately for our culture.
Yeah.
And I think you talked a lot about fear, talked a lot about shame. That whole Hosea illustration, oh man, that's such a good illustration because of Hosea, what you talked about. I think most of us, our first go-to answer is probably be like Hosea.
Yeah, I know.
Let's just suffer. Let's be like Jesus.
Yeah.
And we'll just take it. And even in first gen, we see a lot of that. We know a lot of marriages in the first gen, wife and husband both don't go to church.
Oh, yeah.
husband is beating the wife.
Oh, yeah.
Wife just sucks it up, posing for the sake of maybe of the honor shame, or for the sake of like, I got to be like Jesus.
Sure.
And God bless them. Some of them are like trying to just be that witness for the husband. But oh my gosh, at the same time, it's like there's no end to it. And they think for every time I get punched in the face or something, it's like for the glory of God. It's so unbelievably hard. And again, when it comes to second gen, we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
That question that you said where they say, like, you're not going to get divorced, are you? Oh my gosh, so insensitive. But it's like, that's what we really think about.
I know.
Just for the glory of God, like try to stick it out, try to stick it out. And so unbelievably difficult because we don't know what to do.
Yeah. What's offensive about that question, you're not going to divorce, are you? And even like if we kind of follow the trail to, okay, if we give this person the benefit of the doubt, they're thinking marriage is sacred. They don't want to do anything that like can throw shade at, what marriage ought to symbolize, the Christ and the church, combo and everything. And so they want to uphold, these kind of things, all for the glory of God. I divorced, and for a while, I became the prodigal in response to my own shame and my own trauma. And then somehow the Lord pulled me from the pit. And I learned a lot about life through not only what happened to me, but also my own awful response to what happened to me. And my faith in the Lord grew in ways that were unexpected to me. I now have a very sensitive pain radar to people who've been betrayed. I'm able to use even just like my experience of having gone through a divorce and to minister to people who are divorced. I'd like to think that how God used all of that also was for the glory of God. To just stay in a marriage out of fear or whatever and think that that is the only way to glorify God is short-sighted, I think. Though I can maybe understand where they're coming from, but I want to be able to illuminate this whole situation and say, let's stop thinking that just staying in the marriage is the only way to glorify God. Can we make room for like 18 other ways for a person to glorify God?
Yes.
Right? Because once we say just stay in the marriage because you're going to, taint, the symbol of Christ in the church, then it's like, oh, shoot, then I'm going to be a bad Christian if I do this.
Right.
And that's not fair. I think that's in a way that's kind of spiritually abusive, So I feel like I'm now at a place where I can use platforms to speak into this issue because it's very important to me that pastors stop banging that drum. It's not healthy.
Can I just say thank you so much for sharing that? I know it's a dark time, a painful time. It's just that we know people who have gone through this, but because of our culture, they don't want to talk about it. Of course, it's painful for them. But your story, your testimony, just for anyone who's watching right now, I think is going to be so helpful for them, especially in our Korean culture. No one knows who to talk to about these types of, especially even if they know someone else has experienced it, they don't even want to talk to them about it because of our culture. And so for you to be able to share all that, I'm just so thankful. And I think it's going to be such a blessing to so many people. Well, thank you so much.
Happy to share it.
Hey, real quick, thank you so much for watching. If you're finding value in this content, can you please support the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, selecting all on the notification bell, or write a comment down below. All 4 of these things helps our channel get pushed out more on YouTube homepages so that more people can find this value. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. You know, you went through that whole thing, but now you're in a new marriage, and you have a daughter. Is it right? You have a daughter. What was that process like? Because this is also something I think a lot of people don't know how to deal with. Going from that to be able to trust someone again and be able to get married again. What was that journey like?
It was so you know Pastor Wilson Wang.
Yes.
Okay. So
buddy of mine.
So he's now the co-host with me for the Same Boat podcast. And so we just released an episode about the Wild West of online dating.
That's awesome. The Wild West.
Yeah. So he and I and my wife, Jen, she guest hosted on this particular episode. And in this episode, I share a little bit about what it was like to get back out there into the dating world. And those were my prodigal years, you know, of not really learning, not really knowing how to handle the void and the hurt and feeling so, I felt like in many ways, my ex-wife's affair was my fault, you know, like, was I not caring enough? Was I not manly enough? Like whatever this guy had, that must be what she's comparing me to. And so felt so bad about myself. Those prodigal years was about me compensating, was about me saying, God, you screwed me over. So take that, you know? Yeah, like so many awful ways of approaching online dating, like truly unethical, objectifying people. They're just another person. If not even a person, I don't think I really saw them as people. They're just like another way to numb the pain. And that happened for 3-ish years.
You were doing online dating for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like meeting up with people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe off and on for like 3-ish years. And I don't know whether it's right to say I had to go through that until I can kind of awaken. Because I had a lot of agency in that. But after that season, I did feel as if my own heart had healed sufficiently from the divorce. I didn't feel like it was my fault anymore. I didn't feel like, and when I say not my fault, I didn't feel like the affair was my fault. We all contribute to whether it's, you know, conflicts in marriage and things like that. But, you know, having an affair is not something that is anyone's fault but the person who had the affair, you know. I stopped feeling less than. I was comfortable in my own skin. I felt like I made some peace with God. And I think through that new state of mind, when I did continue on with online dating, like I eventually met Jen, my wife right now. And she and I shared a lot in common. Maybe not so much like preferences because we're like opposite in every way. But like she and I shared the same language when it came to our experience as divorced people.
Oh, she's also divorced.
She's also divorced.
Okay.
Yeah. So our daughter is her bio daughter, right? So it's my stepdaughter, but you know, she's basically my daughter.
Yeah.
I felt like that transition it wasn't as if like, it was a long road to get to a place where I finally met Jen. I had to kind of rethink myself because I felt like when I was previously married, I was a very black and white thinker. I didn't have a whole lot of empathy for people. I felt like the way that even I approached ministry was just kind of businesslike, and I think most of that was born out of my own anxiety to do things well. But I think as I went through my own trauma and even just like my own wilderness, I started to have a much softer approach to people and to life and to myself. And so rather than feeling like I needed to prove a whole lot of things, I just became curious about a whole lot of things and like open palmed about a lot of things. And I think that served me well when I was now dating Jen, because I didn't feel like, oh, since I found someone great, uh, I had to make this work or else like I'm just going to go back to being a loser. I felt like, oh, here's someone great and let's see where this goes. But I didn't have the same kind of anxiety as I did when I was first dating like my first wife, because that was truly out of desperation. I felt like I was such a loser and that no one like reciprocated my affections for them. And so when she did, I'm like, oh, I can't let this go. Right. So it's a very different mindset.
When you were dating for those 3 years, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that you were just kind of doing it as like your own kind of personal selfish satisfaction.
Totally.
So there was, in those 3 years, is it true that you weren't really looking to find someone? It was just, you were just trying to find like almost like a companion just for a coping mechanism.
I might have told myself that I was really looking for something substantial.
Yeah.
But one of my therapist friends up there called me out on it.
Okay.
Like I would share with her some of the updates on like, whatever, like my dates and everything. And then she's like, hold up. Why is it that, okay, why is it that a lot of these people that you're talking to are like out of state, one person's in like Canada, one person's in, I don't know, Vancouver or something like that. And I was like, I don't know. It's just kind of what my search filter, shows to me. It's like, no, I'm calling BS on that. She's like, I think you're just doing it for the thrill of the chase. And you really are not ready to find someone that you want to commit to, because them being long distance is an easy out. And I'm like, curse you. Curse you for your wisdom.
Thank God for godly friends. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. So she's right. I wasn't really looking for anything substantial. My behavior showed otherwise, that I was just looking to compensate, to prove that I could still like, have people like me back. And it was just really unhealthy.
When you met Jen, and you said you're in a better place now, and you're thinking clearly, and you guys are dating together. For anyone who's watching, who's a Christian, follower of Jesus, what were kind of some key essentials that you felt like you had to establish with yourself and with her to be able to go into another marriage again? What were some of those key essentials?
I think I needed to make sure that I wasn't coming into this from a place of need. And I think now that I've been doing a lot of counseling and I hear the backstories of how people got married, that's one of the big things that occurs is people go into dating and into marriage from a place of need, whether it's like, I need to have a baby before I get too old, or I need to, have my parents get off my back, or I need to keep up with all these other friends of mine who are also getting married, right? It's a lot of people aren't really thinking about, can I find someone who's truly compatible with me and that can kind of enhance life, but not become life to me, but they can like enhance life because we can do it together. So I had to make sure that I wasn't coming into this relationship from a place of need and desperation to kind of validate myself. And I probably had to exercise that sort of, mental regimen frequently, just checkpoints to myself. And when I could do that consistently, like, yeah, this is not coming out of a place of like desperation. I felt like I could go like another stage, in the relationship. And eventually I got to meet her daughter and feel like, again, this is not something like, oh, I need to be a parent or I need to whatever, but like, this kid's awesome, And yeah, it'd be great to eventually have a family together. And I think she was in the same space. I think she also didn't approach it from a place of like, I need to be married, but rather working on yourself where you actually feel okay being single, and that's probably going to trip up a lot of people. Like a lot of people don't really like being single. They feel that urgency to be with someone. And
well, especially in our culture too.
Oh yeah,
it looks down upon when you're not married.
That's right. That's right. And there is that human element. I don't think you can eliminate that completely, but I think when you stop and really consider like, how badly do I need this? And some people say, and they're honest with themselves, like, I need this badly. That's when you are set up to overlook a lot of like character traits, in the person that you're dating and say, that's okay. It's okay that they abuse this. It's okay that they are addicted to that. It's okay that, they're horrible at owning their stuff. It's okay that, they're more married to their mom than they are to me. Like we overlook it because we're thinking it's just better to be married, and then maybe I'll deal with the other stuff later and maybe it'll get better, but usually it doesn't.
Was there any fear, or maybe it was more comfort that Jen was also coming from a divorce previously? Did that
comfort?
Yeah, he was more comforting to you.
Oh yeah,
because she understood where you were coming from.
Yeah, I think if I were to marry a never married person, there might always be that thing in the back of my head that feels like, are they settling for me? Would they ever change their mind because like, this isn't, what they signed up for. Maybe like the cultural stigmas would kind of get to them. But it felt relieving that she also was divorced because I didn't have to explain myself as much. I explain myself as a person, but not explain myself as a divorced person. And I think she felt similar comfort in me in that way. If anything, it wasn't about her being divorced, but it's about her having a kid that produced the anxiety of like, can I be a good step parent? I had never done that before, and I think what gave me a lot of comfort was that through the course of our dating, I became really close to Audrey. So it was, I felt like marrying Jen was really like I'm saying I do to a family, not just to one person. And I felt quite good about that.
I think what you said before is really true. Like the Lord took you on this Job type of journey and to really prepare you for something that, again, that's really needed in our culture, to be able to counsel people who have gone through these type of experiences. But even just sharing your story like this, it really helps people get a little bit more comfortable, maybe taking that next step, getting counseling or talking about it. And now you're doing something else that I think is really kind of taboo in our culture. And you do a lot of counseling focused on sexual addiction. I see your posts a lot about that. You're doing a lot of seminars, a lot of these open calls, a lot of it for just pastors too. I see it on Facebook. You're doing like these pastors who are struggling with pornography and sexual addiction. Where does this come from? Is it because you have heard a lot about it? Is it because in our culture we never talk about this stuff?
Yeah.
How did you start to get into like just such a focus on counseling with sexual addiction?
I think wanting to explore sex addiction as a counseling focus happened probably in like 2016 or so, 15 or 16. By that time, I had started my private practice, but I was kind of like a generalist. When different counselor friends of mine would reach out to me and say, hey, I have this one person, a potential referral for you. Do you know how to treat porn addiction or sexual infidelity and things like that? I said, well, not formally. Like it's not like I've been trained in that, and I don't quite know whether I want to lead someone down a path of recovery when I don't really know the steps. So I would kind of be saying, I'm not sure whether I'm the guy, but maybe I'll look around for you and kind of see whether I can find something. And then as I kept on asking around, and then the answers always led back to this one organization that certifies counselors to really be trained in this kind of stuff. I realized, okay, it seems like they are the go-to resource. But then I kept on getting inquiries from people like, hey, do you have space for something like this? I was like, wow, what's going on here? I felt like this was week after week, I'm getting like these inquiries. So I started to get pretty interested in this as a field. And, full disclosure, like I started viewing porn back before the internet, but then it wasn't like this frequent. It couldn't be frequent back then because you don't have access, right? Like I was too young to get nude magazines from behind the cashier. And, I'm not going to pay for a subscription to a nude magazine to come to my home. My way of access to sexually stimulating images and videos was through like VHS R movies, or like, I have a very active imagination. So if you have Sears catalogs, they have like the lingerie section, and like a teenage boy can let their mind go wild, right? So that's kind of where it all started. But then once the internet came, that became the nuclear bomb for most sex addicts. So my own sexual addiction became out of control once the internet came. And so even when I was pastoring, and some of the people might be asking me, oh, how do I deal with this like porn problem of mine? I'm too embarrassed to tell them like I've got the same issue. Again, going back to the whole topic of internal expectations and that kind of thing, like mine was, I've got to be a role model. And role model means I can't fail at anything. So far be it from me from telling these people, hey, brother, like I'm in the same camp as you, let's try to figure this out together. Like, I'll be like, I'm not sure, but I'll pray for you, which is a nice quick out, to basically say, dude, never bring this up to me again. Okay. And I know that's what a lot of pastors do, God bless their hearts, because they don't want to out themselves either. But this was my chance of dealing with a very prevalent issue now as a counselor. And I realized that this was something super close to my heart, because I could identify both with the addiction, but I can also identify as the one who has been betrayed by sex, right? So the fact that this organization gives you the training to counsel addiction towards recovery, but also counsel betrayed partners from their trauma. Like, I was like, this is a great path. Like, I was totally on board, and I just soaked everything up like a sponge, and it's been great. I love being able to counsel pastors and people in the church, because I know what it takes for them to admit to another person, like, this is really an issue for them. And I feel excited for them, actually, because that type of admission, and then the rigorous steps that one needs to take to actually go through and feel like you are on a recovery path, is so parallel to like kingdom living, like to feel that the gospel is for you because you think that you are the worst person ever, and to feel like God is actually partnering with me in this particular sin and allowing me to feel freedom from it, is like, this is the stuff that churches don't talk about, but man, like, this is probably what every church should be talking about.
Yeah, we should be talking about it. And from people who are watching right now or listening, they should know that this is not a problem just for singles. A lot of married people
for sure
struggle with pornography. And I think
that's right.
I think that's why, especially for pastors, Mark Dever said this one line, it's lonely at the top.
Oh yeah.
And I think for Koreans, it's even lonelier at the top, because there's so much that we can't talk about because we don't want to be seen as a failure. We got to uphold our image, the whole honor shame thing.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a double whammy for us. And so with married couples, especially, because people think married couples, that doesn't make sense. Where do you think this pornography and sexual addiction comes from? Because people always think, oh, I'm married, so it should just disappear.
Right.
But where do you think, why do they still struggle with it?
Right. That is a common assumption. So I think the quick answer to why married people struggle with it is because they never dealt with it when they were single. Mm. So I'm a firm believer in the power of the brain, how God designed the brain to allow people to learn things and to form habit, right? So even when it comes to learning how to drive, I mean, you're operating this huge piece of machinery, and you've got this wheel and these pedals on the bottom, and you're trying to make sure that you drive safely and you look both ways and all that kind of stuff. And you remember, everyone remembers their first time trying to drive, like how frightening it is. And you're trying to get everything right. And, and then for anyone who's been driving for a period of time now, if someone says, hey, can you run to the store for me and, get me this? You're like, no problem. You hop into the car and you're out and you're doing it, and you come back. Like, you don't even think about, oh, thank goodness I remembered all the steps in driving the car. Like, it's just so automatic, because God designed the brain to learn things through repetition and practice until it becomes second nature. So why not also for the bad habits, right? So when it comes to something like sex and sexual images and fantasy, it starts off innocently enough when we're kids. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe I'm seeing these nude images. Like, what is this? Like, this is crazy. What am I experiencing on the inside? And there's really no guidance from outsiders, from parents or for anyone, because these are all secretive things that are happening and we're not sharing with anyone. But then once you start to pick up a habit of like going back to the images, going, clicking to getting more. Like, I can't believe I have access to all these different images. And then now we're doing that when we're bored. We're doing that when we're stressed. We're doing that when we're angry. We're doing that when, we just have spare time. And of course, we're doing that in secret. We're not doing that at Starbucks. We're not doing that at the Biola library, right? Unless you're in a cubicle in the basement. But, we're not doing that in class at seminary. Like, we know better to not do this publicly. So everything's in secret. And when we're married and we have never dealt with this habit, we're doing that in secret as well. In the car when wife isn't there, or after everyone's asleep, you're doing it on the iPad or whatever it is. And eventually, you don't cover your tracks well enough, and then something happens, and then the spouse finds out about it. And now it's like World War III. And that's why it exists in marriage, is because we've never really dealt with it in effective ways, especially as a single person.
It's so hard for Koreans to confess to something like this. It's so hard for Koreans to even seek out help because, again, we don't want people to find out that we're struggling. Why do you think it's so hard for Koreans? Because I really believe Korean pastors need counseling. We need it, man.
Totally.
We need counseling. I tell people all the time, like, at least like a mentor in your life that is checking up on you, you absolutely need it. But why do you think it's so hard? I think for us, actually, it is kind of shifting where I do see my friends actually talk about it like on social media and stuff. So it is kind of shifting where we are sharing that we're getting it. But why do you think it's so hard for us to call and say like, hey, can I schedule a counseling appointment?
I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons. The first one I can think of is how homogeneous the Korean culture is. So because not a whole lot of other Koreans are doing it, then it's like, then I don't want to stand out. I don't want them to find out. So I wonder, like, because, at my church, there's a culture from the top that's very open about their counseling, about their addictions, about all that stuff that maybe a lot of Korean churches won't talk about. And sure enough, I find that a lot of people in our church now freely talk about that stuff because it's kind of, the leaders have paved the way for this to be an approachable topic. But in Korean culture and for Korean pastors, if Korean pastors never really hear that other pastors do this, then they're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a complete failure, which is why I feel it's good when, now we have like digital media, we have podcasts and, videos and interviews where, older Korean pastors, older folks, I'm nearing 50 now, right? So I'm kind of like in the dinosaur age, but, we can openly talk about this stuff. And hopefully this allows like this type of collective voice who is open about getting counseling and addiction can make it easier for other people, whether it's same age as us or maybe like the next generation, to feel like, okay, if they're doing that, then they're normalizing it for me. Then, yeah, I guess this is what people do, But I do think that the homogeneous culture has something to do with it.
As you know, here at the seminary, we're trying to bring the first gen and second gen together.
Mm.
We're trying to resolve just a little bit, as best as we can, this divisive gap between first and second gen. We still hear about these problems in the Korean church. So we're going to try our best to help these cultures understand each other. When you hear about that vision and you hear about an English MDiv program that we're creating for Korean English speaking students and pastors and missionaries, if there was a course or even like an essential that you feel like, man, Korean Americans, they need, especially with your pastoral experience, they need to understand this better, learn this better. What would that be? What would that be for you?
I have a list of like 25 things. So, okay, I'll go down to the essential. If we don't truly feel that Christ is fully in the business of taking our shame upon himself, pastors will find it very, very hard to do anything in ministry other than fake stuff. Because shame is the big difference, I think, between real talk and just like theological knowledge. But there's got to come a point where we don't just believe that Jesus died for us, that he makes perfect atonement for our sins, great soteriology, great eschatology, all that stuff. Like, fine, we know that stuff. But there's got to come a point where our relationship with God is so thankful that he has dealt with our shame, where we can say, okay, if that's the case, I could be way more honest about myself and rest underneath the protective umbrella of God's grace, alongside my brothers and sisters. And if I get canceled, all right, I'll look for another job, whatever. But at least I'm living my life with a true lived experience of God dealing with my shame, right? But I think what happens is that a lot of times, even pastors will, just like when I first started out, I'm just thinking so much about, I need to do this right. And I need to put up a certain image of myself as a pastor, as an authority figure. I need to be a role model. And if I can't actually be perfect in my living as a role model, then I've got to fake it. I have to fake it, or else I'll be canceled. And so we're so driven by what people will think of us, and we're so driven by protecting our shame, because that never really actively was given over to Christ in the first place. So if there can be a class where week after week we just talk about that,
like theology of shame,
just like theology of shame,
application
of shame. Think about a lab, within that class, where people are confessing things that they have never confessed before, because this is their exercise of handing over their shame to the Lord and saying, what is shared in this class stays in this class. And it might be a big thing to ask, but it might make people realize, oh, I've got a ways to go in actually developing my relationship with the Lord, because maybe it's just me peddling the gospel. Maybe it's like, I've got this product, right, that I want to deliver, but I don't know whether I've actually tasted this product myself. If you taste the product and you realize, oh my gosh, this shame thing is like, him actually taking my shame is a real thing. And that allows me to share freely about myself in all of my, my sin nature, and say, like, I did this I own it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for my patriarchy. I'm so sorry for my racism. I'm so sorry for my objectification of women. I'm so sorry for all these things, right? Like, can you imagine like how much joy there is in not only receiving the forgiveness of God vertically, but receiving the forgiveness of your fellow brother and sister because you are owning your sin towards them, and they are saying, let's be restored together, and let's continue to worship, because even though you feel like you're the worst person in the world, like, we are given such value by God because of just his favor for us, So I feel like if we're not talking about those kinds of things and really getting to the essence of our Christian living and how much shame dominates that, I just think we're doing a lot of pretending or just a lot of dancing around essential things.
And I think that's one of the main reasons why Korean pastors struggle so much, because that's exactly what we're doing. We're not sharing, we're not confessing.
Yeah.
And when you were talking before about a lot of the mutual differences and struggles, that's what I thought about. I thought, man, we should think about doing a theology of shame course. And so I think that's a great idea. Great idea. You're at Renew Church with my buddy Wilson. By the way, when I went to that service a couple of weeks ago, you have a lot of MFTs at your church.
We do.
He talked about in his vision. He said there's like this whole counseling arm in his vision that he talked about. I was like, wow, you guys have a lot of counselors here. And I saw your name on the slide. Actually, I remember that now. I saw your name on the slide. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So you're attending there. And Audrey, is she like 10 now or 11?
13.
13. Okay. Teenager.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So you're a whole nother chapter there with raising a teenager. And I'm sure that's fun.
That's great.
Challenging. And you're at New Legacy Counseling. That's the name of your practice, and doing that every day. It's so great. I'm so thankful that I got to spend time with you, not only here, but in our counseling sessions. And I love what you're doing and just really trying to focus on pastors a lot too, and giving them this safe space. I'm so thankful for that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's going to be a blessing to so many people watching.
I'm happy to do it. And thanks for the opportunity.